Welcome back. I hope you had a chance to re-energize as we have lots more content to cover. Let's move on to our third panel this morning, discussing transportation. More specifically, the road to net zero through decarbonising public transport as the sector gains more focus from local authorities. The drive behind this focus stems from 27% of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions coming from the transportation sector in 2019, making transport the most polluting sector in the country. When we start to explore transportation, we'll discover there is no singular decarbonisation strategy which we can rely on to change public transportation. Instead, we must look at a multifaceted approach. This includes electric vehicles, sustainable fleet solutions, carbon efficient buses, smart parking, and charging infrastructure. So, joining me for this conversation, we have Kate Atwood, Associate Director Highways at WSP. Oh, Andy's going to join us, I hope, in a moment. If Andy makes it, he's Lead Research, Environment and Sustainability at Crown Commercial Service. Dr. Scott Copsey, Director of the Smart Mobility Unit at the University of
Okay.
Hertfordshire. And Richard Williams, Head of Transport Policy for the Consumer Council. So don't forget to submit any questions you have for our panellists in the live Q&A function on the right-hand side of your screen. We had lots for the last panel, so do send us lots for this panel because it's always interesting to get your views. And I'm putting my specs on now to just check. I think we have got Andy. So brilliant. That's good. Good. Let's start, if we may, on this panel by asking each of you a little bit about your role, what you do, and where you fit into that transportation jigsaw. And Andy, we'll kick off with you as you just scraped in there by the skin of your teeth. Kick us off.
Okay, first thing, can you hear me okay?
We can.
You can. Okay, thank you. I had a few technical issues, which is why I was late, so I just wanted to confirm, that's all. Yes, my name is Andrew Smith. I work for Crown Commercial Service under Environment and Sustainability. I also work closely with carbon reduction plans that we've got in place and working with towns and cities, councils, central government, arm's length bodies, and all the various areas around government. Transportation side of it, the majority of my side is a little bit on the fleet, but also on the infrastructure behind it. I think would be the best bet. So the EV chargers, solar generation, that kind of stuff. Is electrifying the fleet is one side, but also how do you keep them on the road and powered is the other.
Cool. A lovely introduction. Richard, you're joining us from Belfast. Will you give us a little potted history of where you fit in with the Consumer Council?
Okay, so I'm Richard Williams, the Head of Transport Policy with the Consumer Council. In case it wasn't apparent from the name of the organisation, we are the Consumer Council for Northern Ireland. So we represent consumers in Northern Ireland in transport, energy, water and financial services. And primarily, we've got two kind of roles. We deal with complaints from transport consumers. We cover ferries, airlines, and public transport. And then we also develop policy. So what the role really is to take the information we get from complaints and to basically sort of survey the consumer landscape, undertaking research and represent consumers in Northern Ireland at Stormont, and occasionally in matters which are from Westminster, we will represent them at Westminster with all policymakers.
Lovely. Kate, you're joining us from the most glamorous of Zoom locations with your fairy lights. I'm liking those. Give us a flavour of what you do with WSP.
Yep, I just qualify they are solar powered for the purposes of this discussion. So I'm Kate Atwood. I'm a group director for WSP. I look after the Highways Wales business. And my role is operational. So I have operational responsibility for a team of around 60 staff that operate both sort of pan Wales, but also nationally across the UK. We work for, in a highway sense, we work for local authorities, we work for local and national government, and also the trunk road agents in Wales. And then in the UK, we work for National Highways, formerly known as Highways England, and other private clients. But our teams are predominantly now highly multidisciplinary in the context of carbon. Lots of ITS collaborations, lots of environmental sustainability collaborations, which I think is very exciting space for highway engineers to be in. So
absolutely. And last but certainly not least, Scott, just give us a flavour of your role at the University of Hertfordshire.
Oh, thanks, Helen. Good morning, everyone. Yes, so I'm Dr. Scott Copsey. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Hertfordshire, specialised in transport planning and town planning. Within that role, I also lead the Smart Mobility Research Unit, which is about bringing professionals and academics together within that unit to research all the kind of things we're hopefully going to talk about here, primarily transport and how we transition to zero carbon. But as part of that, I'm very passionate about training the next generation of town planners and particularly transport planners in this subject. I'm very passionate about that, and there is a skills shortage in that area. So we're about to launch a new Masters in Transport Planning in the new year to facilitate that, which will offer links with industry. So of varied issues. And I've also implemented transport policies for the university. So trying to get people to change their behaviour, both staff, students, anyone who knows academics, trying to get them to change behaviour is a big challenge.
Learning is something we'll come on to later in the panel about how we learn and, you know, what the new opportunities are there to understand what, you know, what challenges we face. But Scott, just starting off with you then on the challenges, where are we? What are the main challenges the transportation sector faces on our journey? You know, our journey that we have to make now. It's not a choice anymore, the journey we have to make to net zero.
Nice, easy one to start with. Yes, well, we sort of asked that very question at the beginning of 2020. We are predominantly a rural university, sort of just on the conurbation of edge of London, but relatively rural. Lots of challenges. I think behaviour is the biggest one. How are we going to change people's behaviour? So we started this debate with partners such as the Department of Transport, our own local authority. We're a big believer that we have to work as an organisation ourselves with our own partners. We set up a series of roundtables, which we're in the process of publishing. This was led by my colleague, Stephen Joseph, formerly of the Campaign for Better Transport. And there's a whole array of different issues. It's taking on car dependence. There's lots of really good transport plan initiatives out there, but they're all peripheral. And I include that at the university. I've been trying to implement for 15 years initiatives which has a substantial change in getting people out of their cars. And if I'm honest, we had very little change. We do actually operate our own bus company. We have a fleet of about 75 vehicles. But we as an organisation, as a university, even though we own that operation, we still ultimately tend to promote the private car through ultimately very free or heavily subsidised car parking. So there's the big structural issues that we as organisations have to change to help facilitate, we believe, individual change. And that comes down from government, from local authorities, organisations like ourselves working with them, and also making people aware of their behaviour. I've mentioned students. I lecture to students. We know the issues of carbon emissions. We tell them how, you know, the really bad impact we're having. We have glacial scientists in our team. They come in and say it's far worse than people think. You then say to the students, would you change your behaviour? And they will say, no, I'll still jump on an aeroplane. So it really is what's been sometimes coined a systems approach. We have to look at the whole system, from how we build our houses, the density of them, and ultimately linking transport with that. We need to get people at that level to think drastically about changing our behaviour. And probably the COVID pandemic has provided us with a bit of a, I suppose, a coat hanger where we can say drastic change can happen, and can happen very quickly, working away from the workplace. I've only been in the workplace 8 days in the last 18 months. So there are ways we can change that. So,
Kate, I know the fact that you know, Scott there has mentioned the word behaviour a number of times, and I know that's really going to resonate with you. How can we change the way society behaves to try and deliver those net zero ambitions?
Yeah, it's a very big question, isn't it? But I think ultimately, by understanding and addressing the barriers to change is a big part of that. And I think we have to look at that ourselves, inside ourselves. Change and choice is something that everybody is used to having access to in the society that we live in. There are places in the world where that's a lot less easy. But I think if, as Richard just said, if you look back to a pre-COVID time, that influenced people's decisions to use public transport, and those barriers still exist. And I think that is a bit of a hurdle. So we do need to work with the public to overcome and adapt, and basically facilitate them to choose to make different choices. I think people have generally quite a good appreciation for social, sort of access issues and the fact that using a car is bad and using a train or a bus is better, but that still doesn't really make that change easy. I think we have to aim for that full scale behaviour change though, because that's, it's the same as banning smoking in pubs and not wearing a seatbelt. I mean, I think all of those things are things that were a bit hard at the time, a bit difficult to do. And from an industry point of view, we have to continue to play a real active part in using our influence and enacting our sort of corporate social responsibility to promote this stuff in the right way. And I think integrating net zero into all the advice we give clients is a big part of that, because we can be active about doing that. We're kind of in control of that tap as far as that is concerned. So we should do that stuff. All of us, who give professional advice can choose to do that better, and we should. And I think we are. I think positively, I think we are. There are a lot of innovations out there. WSP have got a future ready campaign, which is a big part of embodying those behaviours into our projects. So we don't do projects just because they're net zero, but we facilitate future ready into all our projects. And I think that's a big thing. Every person in the field has to buy into that. As a culture, as a behaviour, and then society will pick up on that, I think, as time passes. And time is the key there, isn't it? Because there isn't a lot of time, unfortunately.
There's very little time. If you watch Lewis Pugh, the UN patron of the oceans, swimming in the Arctic at the minute, and you see the ice caps melting, and happening in the 30 years that he's been doing it in just a pair of Speedos to try and get the world's attention, it's quite shocking. Richard, it leads us nicely on, I think, to what role consumers play in decarbonising transport, and can you enlighten us a little bit about the view of consumers at the minute on making sustainable choices? How aware are we all that we have to do this?
Well, the first I would like to say it's really good. I was thinking of coming on this panel with a lot of people who are very technical in their kind of approach, but obviously what I've heard already is that there's an appreciation of the understanding that consumers are very much at the centre of this. Everything that happens is all about behavioural change. We're asking consumers to change the way that they travel, the distances they travel, where they travel to, how frequently. So that we've really got to bring consumers on board. And what we're picking up, I mean, there's various amounts of research have been done. We've done some ourselves in Northern Ireland, and what we're finding is that consumers are concerned about the environment. Clearly, I mean, why wouldn't they be? We're seeing so much stuff going on our TVs. They're concerned about it, but they seem to be kind of overwhelmed, is what they're telling us. They don't really know how to deal with it. And it's easy for them to kind of switch off and take that kind of decision. They can't quite make the connection between things that they're being told to do or they feel is the right thing to do and actually how that makes a change. So more often than not, the status quo just kind of kicks in, and there's that kind of attitude of, I'll do this next time, I'll think about it next time, but this time I'm still going to make the same behavior. And you get that kind of status quo just continues. We need to kind of break that. And I think in order to do that, we do need to understand very much that kind of behavioral change kind of understanding around what motivates consumers, and we know that they're primarily one of the biggest motivators obviously is cost, how much things they could save money is how much it's going to cost them, but also there's kind of like more soft things around the positive lifestyle. That they want to be able to be seen to be living a positive lifestyle. They want to be doing things that make them feel good. They like the idea, people were telling us that they like the idea of growing their own vegetables, this kind of thing. It makes them feel good. And somehow we can kind of factor all that in there. Then, we can understand and then start creating the kind of incentives that will enable people maybe to make those changes. And I mean, the kind of model that we kind of use or work on is that we engage, enable, and protect. So one of the key things is really engaging with consumers throughout this process. We really do need to understand ongoing, continuously, exactly what motivates them and what kind of things will actually motivate them to make the change. And the enabling as well, I mean, I think probably some of the experts on the panel and the operational people will come up with all there's loads of different things we've talked about, isn't there, about bike lanes, infrastructure, whether there should be penalties or there should be incentives. Consumers certainly tell us, and it's pretty obvious one really, that incentives are what they like. That's what they're going to react to. That's what they've said. They don't like penalties. But I think that engagement with them is very much from government is going to be an honest conversation saying, we, I think, know that there's going to have to be some things which involve penalties. Maybe it's congestion charging, maybe it's taxing cars. There needs to be that an honest conversation with consumers, rather to sort of that they understand why that they may need to make these sacrifices. And I think, I suppose the last thing to say just at this point is that when we do have those kind of maybe punitive measures or any of the kind of financial measures, we make sure that it's done in an inclusive way. We make sure it's not regressive. We make sure that the most vulnerable, lower income consumers aren't the ones who fall behind. And, the kind of incentives that we provide just go to those kind of the middle class people who'd be changing their car anyway, that kind of aspect. So it's that kind of, the engage, enable and protect is the kind of the ethos we're using.
I think you're right about trying to avoid the punitive side of, I always find that's just a really negative way of encouraging change, really. I think people want to feel valued and get some pleasure out of this sort of change. Andy, I'm sure there was lots in there you'd like to respond to, so respond to whatever you want to. I could see you nodding away, but also I did want to sort of change the direction of the conversation as well, and find out where we are in terms of, let's talk about cars and where we are in terms of EV and hybrid vehicles in use in Britain. But if you want to follow on from what your fellow panelists have said first, be my guest.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, I mean, behavioural change. I was having a conversation with someone about this last week, actually, and it's sort of everybody embraces change, and so we need to have change. We've got to have change to move forward. You can't stay still. You've got to have the change. And so that's great. Okay, what about environment? Yes, we need to save the whale. We need to stop the ice caps. We need to reduce single-use plastic. Okay, so what are you going to change? Nothing. I don't want it to affect me in my life. So I'm all for change as long as it doesn't make any change to me. And I can carry on flying here. I can carry on buying avocados, so on and so forth, whatever it is. So it is, it's one of those, that's going to be the real hard one, is that behavioural change. That was mentioned. And it kind of links into the projects that were mentioned as well. It's sort of like how to build the sustainability into a project and environmental change into a project. And I was literally, the call I was on just before this panel was with a friend of mine in DEFRA. And he was saying how everyone's job objective should include sustainability, irrespective of whatever it is or whatever they do, not just people with sustainability in their job title. Because then they'll look at everything they do as sustainability and how they can actually include, which is, which is, I think would be the ideal world. I can't see it happening personally, but you never know. So behavioural change will always be hard, especially as Richard just mentioned. If we want people to change cars, change their vehicles, move over to EVs, move away from ICE vehicles, then it shouldn't punish the people that are more vulnerable. I was having a conversation with a council, and they were talking about bringing in a clean air zone. They said, "Oh, EVs go free, big cars with low emissions, go free. Older cars don't." I said, "Well, straight away you're punishing that can't afford to go out and spend 15,000, 20,000 on a car for a lower emission one, or 30,000, 40,000 on an EV. You're punishing those people from them actually being able to get to their place of work. And they may be on a minimum wage, and their car is the most efficient cost-related transport they've got to get into to get to wherever they're working about. And so it creates all this ethical dilemma as well. We want to do this, we want to bring in this change, but we don't want to punish anyone. And that's
how do we solve that, Andy? How do we get around that?
See, this is where again, this could be a whole conversation over another couple of hours. It is a difficult one. I mean, basically, the older cars are disappearing off the radar anyway. Each year, a certain amount actually just, they break down to the point where they're no longer economic to repair. So the more efficient cars are working their way down the chain to the people that can only afford to spend, say, £1,000 on buying a car. So these ones will happen, and that will take. I was chatting to, I think it was DVLA. They reckon it would take about 7 years before those cars are down to that level anyway, where they do cover those emissions. But in that time, we'll also increase what the level of emissions needs to be, or decrease it. So it's still going to end up in this difficult situation. So the main response has always been, we need clean public transport for people that is affordable to get in and out of a city very quickly and very easily. I'm in a rural location in North Norfolk. If I want to go into my local city, Norwich, which is 25 miles away, it's going to cost me £8 on a diesel bus, and I need to change bus 3 times. that's not an easy route, especially when it's only going to cost me £3 in a car.
Mm.
Yeah. So if a family is on the lower end of the income spectrum, they're going to go with the car, because they're not going to have 4 people in the bus for £32 or £3 in a car. They're going to go with the car. Yeah. So it's that element. It would be lovely to look into the options of town centre buses all being free, and EV buses as well, would be, bliss for everyone. But it's how do we get to that point where councils and towns and cities can afford that, and they can actually bring that in.
Just briefly, Andy, because I'm mindful of time whizzing, lots of questions coming in and getting to other panelists, but just fitting in with what you're saying, is the other thing that's missing for people who are trying to turn to EV in terms of cars, etc., the infrastructure? Are people still anxious about range? And certainly I'd be nervous about converting to electric right now, because there aren't really many chargers where I am, and I live in a flat, so I can't charge at home.
That's the other side, isn't it? It's curbside charging is the big one. That's the infrastructure that a lot of councils are talking about, how they can have chargers connected to, say, lampposts. So you haven't got cables going across any pavement. So people that live in houses, in flats and apartments, or even in houses where they don't have a garden or a parking area. So there's lots of different conversations going on. There's lots of great innovation going on as well. And I think over the course of this next 12 months, we're going to see some great innovation turning up with different curbside chargers.
Yeah, I saw actually chargers where I live. I saw some chargers on the lamppost the other day for the first time. But Kate, Andy sort of makes a point there, doesn't he, about the sort of public transport? Is that something that we need to look at as a matter of urgency, in terms of electric buses, and also perhaps even, so that it's affordable for everybody, perhaps looking at electric, more sort of pool cars where we share them instead of driving around the country with one person behind the wheel, or a person owning that car? Would it work to have sort of fleet cars, so that, perhaps in your workplace where there's a pool of electric cars and people borrow them, so that it's affordable for all?
I think there is a lot of that, especially fleet in local authorities, service vehicles and things like that. There's a growing energy for that, I think, in certain client organisations. From the experiences I've had, I think in terms of construction, I think it's a very small part of the fleet has any kind of electric or alternative to diesel kind of capability at the moment, but that's always going to get better, isn't it? As things like technology around things like batteries and things improves, whoever's sitting on billions of pounds worth of small battery technology, maybe they're just keeping their powder dry until the moment that they need to, they can release it and make it affordable and easy, and get rid of range anxiety and all those sorts of things. But it is an important thing to think about when if you think about the equality of access for people to transport. It varies depending on where you live, and I think at the moment probably a lot of our focus is on places where most of the people are, which is obviously in cities, which is why perhaps putting energy into things like buses and metro style transport networks is important, and I think that's happening. I think that is happening. But I think we're only just getting to grips with it in terms of generating the policy which joins all of this stuff up. Because if a local authority does it, brilliant, amazing. But if the local authority next door, if the plugs are different, that's not that helpful, really, is it? Because I can't use their plugs because their plugs are a different shape, or whatever.
It's definitely an area that I think Scott will contribute to, because I think you've done a lot of work, haven't you, Scott? Some research for decarbonising transport outside of cities, and trying to help people in rural areas who are quite dependent on their car for work and socialising. Have you got any examples, Scott, you can share with us of the sort of things you've been finding?
Yeah, I mean, we sort of came from this from the university perspective, trying to provide various transport solutions, all the things that Cody's talking about. We now have some electric buses in our fleet. We are also launching a demand responsive offer for North Rural Hertfordshire, so a bit like Norfolk, where Andy and I reside. Not all these services are viable in rural areas, but there are there are some solutions which can start to bring together the word I think Kate I was thinking of when you said strategic thinking around transport, rather than bits and pieces where we as travel planners try to put one cycle bay in here or a cycle path or whatever it might be, which doesn't join up into holistic thinking. It's not what people want. One of the areas in terms of transport planning with our local authority that we've been discussing is something that's concept a few years ago called total transport, where you get the university, you get the National Health Service, you get big providers of transport who pay into their own budget together. You try to join services up. So you join the buses up. And when I say buses, I don't want to just think about buses. I always think we need to have an ecosystem of transport. And that includes cars, although probably do we need to own cars? 96% of the time we own our cars, it's sat there doing nothing. It's not a very good, useful, efficient use of resource. So it is thinking strategically. I think in terms of electric vehicles, again, as the university, we installed electric infrastructure as part of the Plugged in Places initiatives. We launched that across East Anglia, so we know all about putting infrastructure in that is defunct after a couple of months, if not years. It doesn't work. People don't like using it. These are all challenges that need to be thought of holistically, because not everyone wants to use the same transport. And actually, the car is an important part. The key is, how do we make better use of that car? I think that links into the behaviour change. I certainly think central government, and I think it will come because electric vehicles, they have their advantages. But what about the taxation? There's no fuel taxation in there. So road price charging, I think, would be a game changer. This has been debated for longer than certainly I've been in transport planning. And that is a big level political decision that ultimately everyone has to buy into. That has implications for all kinds of reasons, but that's a really good big level game changer that we think will have a big part to play. But certainly pooling budgets across organisations to join up transport planning rather than all being insular, unintegrated, is the kind of work and the research that we've been involved in, and that's what we've been published on this roundtables. And rural areas are very different to cities areas, and the government Department of Transport, who we worked with, said yes, it's a big black hole in terms of policy. We kind of know what we need to do in cities, but what about rural areas that surround cities and beyond? They are different, and that's the kind of work that I'm very keen to embed student learning into. We need to embed learning in at the basic level. So we have planners going out there, transport planners going out there, who understand about climate change, rather than just signing off what we call rather unaffectionately cowpat residential areas, which are just dumped in the middle of rural areas. And by the way, the only way you can get there is by car. We need to really change that system from the route one. Otherwise, we're just building in car dependence, which is what we've all inherited and what we're passing on to the next generation.
Scott, I'd just like to give Richard just a chance to talk about transport and planning and working together there. And then I'm very aware that I'm right at the end of the panel and I haven't taken any questions. So Richard, just a brief one, if you can, on how transport and planning can work together. And then if it's okay, I'll just whiz through some brief questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the role of local authorities, obviously, they're planning the whole transport network. Here in Northern Ireland, we're kind of lucky because we've got one organisation that does most of the main roads, and then we have the district councils. But the problem we've got is, as Kate was saying, I mean, currently they're not really working together in terms of the different transport plans. So we're seeing things going on very much in silos. So I think it's very much for government to ensure that the different organisations that are working together in those different governments, local or central government, do work together to put the different plans in place. And I think just a point about the what was integrated transport. I think that's a really key thing in terms of getting making sure that transport can be used by all people to get them around everywhere. It's that kind of idea of using maybe there's from rural users, they bring a bus in, they get the bus into town, and then the transport hubs, which they're trying to develop a new transport hub here in Belfast, in which active travel is like located that place. So there's your bike is available there, and then there's kind of there's e-charging going on. Everything needs to be integrated in the rural areas. Community transport needs to be integrated into the more wider public transport network, so those things can kind of join up and people aren't kind of isolated, because that's a key thing in the rural areas.
Let's just take a couple of questions, just brief ones if we can, because we have a speaker waiting to come on now. Karen says, do you think the government should take the lead on using TV and social media to promote changes in behaviour?
I would say that that's absolutely the case, 100%. I mean, one of the big things which we've talked about, and it's happening here in Northern Ireland, there's the plan for it's the energy transition, which transport's part of, is to set up a one-stop shop, and that's going to be, it's all about providing information and advice. And the first part of that is a campaign to make people understand what needs to be done and what the benefits are, but also, as I mentioned, that honest conversation, so they understand what, if you want, sacrifices that need to be made, but then providing the information that they need. So if they want to buy an electric vehicle, they understand how they can get a charging point put into their car. At the moment, that information simply isn't there. But not where I am. You can't actually get that kind of information, and it's very much the role of the government to provide that information, provide that campaign, and kick that start as well, and kickstart that, as well as engaging in that conversation with consumers.
Richard says, does the development of autonomous and smart vehicles feature in the thinking of the panelists? And if so, what contribution do they think a shift to autonomous vehicles can make?
10 years away, 10, 20 years away. It's to tell you the truth, it's there, but it's not even worth considering as part of our current plans moving forward over the next 10 years. Is just not high enough on the agenda yet. But I mean, I'd love to see it, but it's, like I say, it's 10, 15 years away. I don't know whether the rest of the panel agree.
I think. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Kate. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think allied to that is the fact that the existing infrastructure in the whole of the UK would need to be completely repurposed in some real sense or other. Now, I think probably your timescales of like 10 years, that probably works well for us, because it's probably going to take that long for us to decide what our strategy is around all of the things that need to be changed, figure out how to implement them in a low carbon way or in a net zero way, and then do it. These things in highway terms often don't happen quickly. I work on a scheme now that I first started working on when I first started work. That's how long, so the kind of the cradle to grave timescales for some of this stuff can be long, and I think
long.
It's important that we think about all of the pieces that go with that. It's about the technology and the vehicle, but then if it needs to run on rails, then we're stuck, aren't we? Because we don't have that.
And technology is changing so quickly, we have to future-proof too. We'll squeeze one tiny question in, which might be perhaps Scott, how can we encourage local deliveries to use electric bikes and EV vans other than install EV charging facilities?
Oh, wow.
Sorry, Scott.
Yeah, local deliveries. Well, interesting enough, this forms part of a new module which we're actually calling operational transport planning. So I'm actually going to get someone in who knows what they're talking about in this area. So this is like cargo bikes and things like that. I think it's part of the mix. I don't certainly profess to be a freight or logistics expert, but it's not going to deliver the amount of freight. Although, having said that, the amount of freight that's being delivered at the moment seems to have gone down quite a lot for various reasons. It's not going to deliver the amount of freight that's needed at local level, I think. So it is part of the mix. The electrification of bikes, I think, generally is quite interesting, because it potentially means people can commute further, perhaps when they wouldn't have done. They may have jumped in their cars. So it is an interesting thing, I suppose, aligned both to the electric vehicles, but also the autonomous vehicles, and also electric bikes, pedal bikes, if you like, or scooters, is the legal side of things. I think a lot of these things we can do that for everything we can talk about, there's always a smart, I run the smart mobility unit, there's a smart solution to it. Smart is technology. But actually, what about the legalities of that? Riding electric cargo bikes or bikes on the road, not legal in many areas. There are trials around the country. So I think it's part of the package, but I do think it's going to be the solution to the things that we like to buy. It comes back to that behaviour change. Do we need to be buying the amount of things we do and get them delivered by, at the moment, white vans all over the place? That's something that we as individuals and society, I suppose, need to talk about. So that's quite an interesting one. We'll see how that develops, the cargo bike concept.
I feel like I've sort of scratched the surface with you all. I do hope that you'll come back for another of these events, because there's so much to about in this area in transportation. We haven't even touched on electric aircraft and all sorts of things that are all sort of part of the picture. So you've been fantastic panelists, and I'm sorry that the time has flown so quickly, but thank you very much for a really great discussion. It was a great discussion to come back to, and it's encouraging as well to see just how many solutions are out there and to get a real understanding of the challenges ahead. So thank you very much for being with us today. Right now, I'd like to welcome Paul Smith, Director of Strategy and Technical Services at Salix Finance. Paul will be sharing insights on the transition from phase 1 of the public sector decarbonisation scheme to phase 2, with its sharpened focus on heat decarbonisation, an emphasis on heating within buildings. So Paul, the virtual stage is yours.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me to do a talk today on what Salix has been doing over the last 12 months with the public sector. My position within Salix, I'm one of a small number of directors, and my focus is really on our technical service side, but also helping to develop sort of new funding programs. And our focus within Salix is to help public sector bodies reduce their energy efficiency, but also deal with their heat decarbonisation, and it's really got a buildings focus. So today I'm going to talk about some of the work we've done with the first phase of the public sector decarbonisation scheme, how that links to phase 2, and then also the timing is excellent because we have been able, with the support of our government department body, launch phase 3 of the public decarbonisation scheme yesterday. So as I say, the timing is really, really good. So the last time I spoke, we at a public sector executive event was the Net Zero event in March, and we were really just talking about how we were getting phase 1 up and running. Since then, we have launched a smaller but really focused scheme on heat decarbonisation of buildings and removing fossil fuel heating systems. And now we have used that learning and the successes of that to really build the platform to launch phase 3. In terms of my time at Salix, I've been with Salix for almost 15 years, and working in buildings with the clients and reducing their heat levels and changing their heat is nothing new. You know, in the early days, lots of our public sector bodies were looking at loft insulation, cavity wall insulation, BEMS, draft proofing. However, once those easier measures or the quicker wins were done, then there was a move away to areas such as T5 lighting took off, LED lighting became mainstream. So fantastic financial savings for public sector bodies to make. But of course, what's now came back into the forefront with all the reporting is how do we deal with the heat? So the recent work that we've done in just over the last 12 months has really been a move from loans to grants, and that has really allowed us to really focus with all public sector bodies, including several central government and their arm's length departments, to really look at how do we deal with heat. So in September last year, we launched a 1 billion scheme, which has been sort of renamed as phase 1 of the public sector decarbonisation scheme. And that was a successful scheme in terms of the appetite and the ambition by the clients, seeing more than 2.4 billion of applications. So we were able to award all that funding. So we're looking at over 320 public sector bodies benefiting, 450 projects being done. We're looking at a size of typically from as low as £5,000, say for a small school, to up to 80 million for a group of combined authorities. Phase 2 was a smaller funding stream, but it was a very important funding stream because this was making the bridge and the linking to future phases. And it was a 75 million funding stream. It allowed we capped the level that you could apply to get a good mix of projects, applications, and regions where that to benefit from it. So we had over 50 projects funded, where the average size was 1.5 million. The interesting thing with phase 2, and I'll make the link to some of the changes in a second, but the funding invested to save a ton of carbon was about 40% more efficient. So we really were getting great value for money in helping the public sector bodies really deliver on their heating needs and moving away from fossil fuel heating. I guess the key reason why heating is so prevalent is that depending on what you look at, and when you look at it, the majority of heating in the UK, be it domestic or non-domestic, is still fossil fuel, 80% plus. So that is why there's such focus now, and that's why we're trying to support the clients in delivering on their heating needs. So phase two, what was interesting about phase two was that first of all, it was really looking at clients having a fossil fuel heating system that was coming to its end of useful life, and they were actually then looking to remove that heating system because it was at its end of useful life. And they were already having budgets or costs in place to say, well, I put in another gas boiler, like for like, etc., etc. So we were then able to bring extra funding to allow clients to consider other options. So for phase two, the typical low carbon heating solutions were a very big focus on heat pumps, be it air to water source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, but also there was a focus in connecting to existing district heating networks. And the other, a technology that wasn't in phase one, but was brought into phase two was biomass. So for the right environment, for the right setting, then maybe a biomass solution is also possible. And with that, we were really seeing a lot of good projects. It was possibly the first, or it's considered to be one of the first real non-domestic heat pump and low carbon heating programs that the UK has seen of any scale. And we were seeing some heat pump solutions more than 0.5 megawatt, more than 1 megawatt. So we really were seeing lots of innovative projects, and it was really allowing the public sector to really be at the forefront of decarbonisation of buildings in the UK. So this sharpened focus on heat was really a big step forward. And from that, we were really allowed to look at how do we then build for future schemes. So part of the talk today is really to say a little bit about the successes and the lessons learned. Well, the successes for both phase one and phase two during such difficult times with COVID was the job creation has been tremendous, really good skilled jobs. The level of carbon being saved again was extremely strong, helping to deal with the heat. The public sector in delivering their projects were able to really start to build the supply chains. The client appetite, the client ambition that we were seeing, as I said, phase one was 2.4 times oversubscribed. Phase two was equally being oversubscribed, and what we had to do was, after a small number of days, was once we had good quality, good complete projects, was to really shut the application window and then just take levels of interest thereafter. It was really helping other great results, such as we were actually taking some coal out of some of the hospitals that were still relying or delivering coal as their heating solution. It was allowing better environments. The measures by moving to a grant was allowing for a whole range of measures. So we were able to do at scale large glazing projects, so moving from old windows that were falling out to super low U value window solutions, as well as more complicated and complex insulation measures. We were also able to award with conditions, so we didn't necessarily expect clients to have final designs done or to have orders ready to place. So we were able to work with the clients to allow them that they'd done enough to give them the confidence to proceed with going into the next sort of design stage and delivery stage of their projects. And as I said, it was really some of the work was really one of the first areas of scale of low carbon heating and allowing public sector to lead the way. In terms of lessons learned, a lot of them are the typical things you would expect. The costs, moving from a design to a final order placement. Some of the costs were going up, but of course some of the costs were going down. So we've done work with clients to close gaps and help them maximize from the funding that they were being awarded. We were seeing some of the delivery time scales being under pressure, maybe just the sheer volume of work. The supply chains in some places were maybe not mature enough, maybe not at the capacity where they need it to be. But of course, it is a bit of a chicken and egg where they need to have that confidence that that business is there for them to scale up on their side. And we were dealing in a COVID environment for the majority of this work. The electrical infrastructure of client sites is an area that we really started to focus on during phase 2, especially because if you were putting in some sort of electrical heating solution, you really needed to understand if your site had that capacity, the extra capacity to deliver on that heat. So perhaps you had already moved and just all your lighting loads or your plug-in loads, but did that free up enough capacity if you were then going into a electrical heat pump solution? And some of that also required increasing capacity from maybe your distribution network operator, putting in new substations. So some of that takes time, and there's a real learning curve there, and that's something that we're really trying to help clients more with. Planning consents, site access, getting the right heating size. You know, if you're moving from a boiler system where you've got absolute confidence and 20 years worth of knowledge on, what knowledge, what client experience do they have of putting in, say, a heat pump? And of course, there's a bit of a learning curve there. Looking at like-for-like costs, looking at redundancy needs, having backup heating systems such as the hospitals. So there's good learning there in terms of how to really make sure you are still having the same standards in place to meet all heating needs for all conditions. Simple things like point-of-use heaters or domestic hot water. You know, if you're moving from your main boiler solution, then how do you cater for your domestic needs? Do you put in an electrical point of use? The other area was the whole policy for both schemes was on a first come first served basis. So what we did for phase 2 was really have a stronger check at the start to make sure the applications were of good quality, were reasonably complete, because what we were wanting to do was not to really neglect clients that had taken a bit longer time to really put a much more detailed, comprehensive application together, and having to be exhaustively working with very sort of soft or poorly developed applications in the first place. So in terms of the help we're trying to give clients, it does come back to, is their electrical infrastructure ready for their next steps? Is their heating system properly sized or well sized for all their heating needs? Does the flow and return temperatures work within a new heating environment? Will their radiators, will their heat emitters be fine, or do they need to be adjusted, upsized, changed, whatever? And we talked a little bit earlier about the domestic hot water needs. So in terms of the opportunity for phase 3, we have yesterday started the launch of phase 3. And phase 3, at the minute, the amount of funding is not set, and that will only be set once government have completed their spending review. And I think that's recently been announced by the Chancellor to be around the 27th of October. So we are now building on phase 2, where again we're looking for clients with fossil fuel heating systems to be replaced with low carbon solutions, because as we move into phase 3, we're moving away the £5 million cap. We've also got a need where there could be multi-year opportunities that for clients that need more time to do more complex projects, to deal with the electrical infrastructure. There is about a 15% pot of the overall fund that will allow for projects not to complete within, say, the 12-month cycle. If we award around January, February 22, then these projects can award after March 23. And so we're looking at maybe awards and completions of projects to March 24, March 25, but that is going to be a limited pot. And the reason that's a limited pot is we do want to prioritize on clients that have a heating solution coming to its end of life now, and we want them to be replacing it with a low carbon solution rather than losing out and putting in a brand new fossil fuel solution. The key timelines are the application form is not yet released. We've got a 20-page plus guidance, very similar to phase 2. We will be starting to do webinars next week for phase 3. We will be looking to finalize and issue the application form next week around the I think it's the 16th of the month. The portal for the application window will not be open straight away. So what we're trying to do is give clients good time to really develop and well evidence their applications. And then the application portal will be opening from a number of weeks now, and that's scheduled to be on the 6th of October. And that will be open for a full month to about the 3rd of November, the way the dates fall. So we will be giving support. There's information on our website, and there's a lot of webinars, as I said earlier, that clients can start to sign up to. So coming back to the core message, we've had lots of great successes with phase 1 and phase 2. The learning curve, the building of supply chains, the decarbonisation of the heat, starting to really lead the way in what's a really difficult area. And building on that, we're hoping to continue some of the great work that we've seen with clients into phase 3. So thank you very much.
Indeed, to the organisers behind the scenes. There were quite a few questions there for Paul that in this session I don't have the chance to put to him, so I'm sure those questions can be saved and passed on to Paul. Thank you so much, Paul. I think you really had our audience engaged when you mentioned the key aim is to enable the public sector to be at the forefront of decarbonising buildings in the UK and create exemplary projects which pave the way to helping the UK government reach net zero by 2050. Let's take a lunch break now. It's a chance to debrief and unwind. Remember to jump into the meeting hub and continue to gain connections and build your community with your fellow delegates, or chat some more to those you've already met. The connections you build are there for you to use into the future, logging in at your leisure and exchanging views here today. This chance to building your community. Our speakers can offer you plenty of knowledge, but a significant source of knowledge on our platform comes from each and every one of you. So do feel free to share your insights too. A reminder, we have some great prizes for those fully taking advantage of community building. Those in first, second and third places will have their choice of prize, either Amazon vouchers, a donation to a charity of choice, or the planting of an equivalent number of trees. So let's meet back at 2 o'clock for our afternoon session and our next panel discussion. I'll see you then.